Well, what we're seeing is a sort of to and fro around some key positions on the Libyan coast at the point where the eastern rebels are trying to advance towards areas that are held by the regime, and some quite fierce fighting. A place called Ras Lanouf, and then a little further west, a place called Bin Jawad. That's where we've been seeing the action. It's hard to say that there's been any decisive outcome. I think what we have seen in the last few days certainly is a more organised effort by the regime to challenge the rebels and to stop their advance. There was this idea maybe a week or 10 days ago that the rebels, the opposition forces in Benghazi, were going to sweep triumphantly westwards towards Tripoli, the capital. That now really doesn't look as though it's going to happen at all. And there is this fighting in which the regime, perhaps in a marginal sense, has got the upper hand for the moment. Well, last week we saw David Cameron being quite outspoken and quite hawkish, if you like, on the Libyan issue, denouncing Gaddafi, telling him he had to go, and really talking up the idea of this no-fly zone, and then really being pulled back, particularly by the Americans, who were pretty dismissive of this, pointing out that, well, it was all very well to talk about a no-fly zone, but in order to do that, that meant bombing of the Libyan air defences, and that really was a very significant thing to do. There's no sense that there is sufficiently wide international support for this either. If this was to be authorised by the United Nations, it would require the support of Russia and China, permanent members of the Security Council, and they have been very opposed to this kind of thing in the past. So that would leave the option of some kind of what's called a coalition of the willing countries which agree to act together to achieve a certain goal. And of course you immediately come up there against the ghosts of the past, not least of the continuing controversy about the war in Iraq and the legality of that. And is it possible to imagine that the United States and Britain and others could by themselves intervene in the Libyan crisis? So all these things are up in the air, and there is a general sense of governments really making things up as they go along. I think the episode involving the SAS is part of that story. Clearly it has a slightly ridiculous Dad's Army quality to it, that Britain's most elite military unit lands in secret in Libya and are immediately arrested by basically, some watchmen on a farm, causing enormous embarrassment. The official story is that this was part of an attempt by the British government to make contact with the Libyan opposition. On the face of it, a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but it does raise the question of why they chose to do it in such a cloak and dagger way, and then was subject to such embarrassment when it was exposed. It does highlight this sense of governments feeling their way through this crisis, because the British government is still talking to the Libyan government. So they're talking to the Libyan government and also making no secret of the fact that they're talking to the armed opposition whose intention is to try to overthrow Gaddafi's regime. So that's a peculiarity of this crisis, and I think that the exploits of the SAS must reflect part of that uncertainty about where things are going.